I'm a folklorist by academic training, and my thing as a folklorist is working in material culture um, in Africana communities to look at the things um, that humanize us, that help us maintain, create, pass on culture and traditions. And coming out of that academic background, um, I have spent most of my life as a teaching artist for the Pennsylvania Council of the Arts, using art, usually discovering what art, what viewpoints are relevant for whatever is the community that I'm assigned to work with, and then coming up with projects that reflect that, that help that community see itself and that reflect back to that community. So when I've been stationed in schools in Philadelphia, I in advance would do work in that community, documenting people, places, to help students understand, what their community is about, what that history is, et cetera, et cetera. And I came to working with veterans in art through the Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Veterans Homes. There are 6 across the state of Pennsylvania. And about 4 years ago, the commandant really took it upon himself to push into this program to bring art in a significant way into those 6 VA homes. So as a pilot project, I took on 2 of those, pardon? As a pilot project, I took on 2 of those VA homes, one in Chester and the one here in Philadelphia. And again, as a folklorist, I want to know more about that community and what their interests are so that I can be sure that what we do creatively nurtures them, feeds them, allows them to speak, have a voice, have a narrative. And that's been very important in working in the veterans homes, because I'm working with veterans who are 66 and older, many of whom have dementia. But it's been a pleasure to do that work and to, do that work to help them come up with ways to help them articulate, be a better part of their communities, exchange with others within their communities, and to speak about their wartime experiences or their experiences as older individuals. And my personal war experience, I myself am not a veteran. My father joined the military during World War II and served at end of World War II, the Korean conflict, and during the Vietnam War. He retired from the Navy after the end of the Vietnam War. My cousin, who lived next door, I grew up in a family compound in Virginia. He served in the Army. I had uncles who served in the Army, Vietnam War. On my block in my little neighborhood in Virginia Beach, Virginia, there were 5 young men just on that block, and that's sort of typical of what happened in that community. But 5 young men went off to serve in Vietnam. 2 died. The others who came back sort of dove into drug and alcohol abuse and sort of stayed there for the rest of their lives. So in my experience, the Vietnam experience sort of wiped out my cohorts, the male cohorts, the men that I might have dated and married. It took them away for whatever reason. And going back to my own family again, my family has experiences in World War I. My grandfather, with 14 children, did not go to World War I. I saw his papers. He was called up, but disqualified. But I had uncles who served in World War I. And then in my own historical research, I've been very attracted to that era of World War I. My dissertation was on my great grandmother and her quilts. And it was during that period of time that my family was transitioning from being an agricultural family in the hinterlands of Virginia, moving into the city of Norfolk to establish themselves. So I'm attracted to World War I for what it represented within the African American community as this moment in time for men who join to see themselves as a part of the larger community, as human, as valorous. So as an artist, and then I'm attracted to the art of war. That's really been, everything has touched me. I've loved the poetry, the language that our veterans have developed, used to express their experiences. The photographs, I've been very attracted to that. But as an artist, number one, and as something who is interested in material culture, number two, those objects that we manipulate and mark them as ways to pass on our culture, those have been sort of the parts of this that have really attracted me. And before I even go to the World War I artists, I'll just bring up one artist whose work, here we go, I can do this now. One artist whose work we return to time and again. I was introduced to this artist in my training to take part in this project. This artist is David Keith, and this is a piece of his that's untitled. We use this during both years of this experience, just to prompt discussion, to explore the language, and in this case, the language of this space, this landscape, the objects that this particular artist chose to include in this particular work of art. And like all good art, you know, the artist may have had one goal in mind, perhaps this helped him cope with his war experiences. But once we put it up on the big screen at the Historical Society, you know, everybody got a chance to weigh in. So those of us who had no military experience, you know, we can look at the composition and look at the setting, the parts of it that we recognize, you know, it's a domestic setting. But then for the veterans who took part, they were able to really pick the images apart. They could talk about the uniform, the armaments that this particular soldier who's depicted to the right of it, what was his job, what war was he participating in. So they were really able to closely read and help prompt what I thought was a really rich discussion about what this artist might have meant, or what worlds was this artist inviting us to look at, or what nightmares was this artist putting on the canvas for all of us to read and pay attention to. You know, and I'm happy that Keith didn't give it a title, because he just allowed us to sort of run away with it and own it and claim it, and you know, use it to in any way we want it. So it allowed us to have some great conversations around it. So as a piece of visual art, I was very impressed by that. And another, I'm just going to throw another piece here, because we're coming off of Halloween, and those of us who are into that holiday can look at some of this and think things. We can see the skull illustrating whatever the top of this particular thing is. It's an object. The artist has titled it Suicide Hotline, Cheaper Than Healthcare. There are actually phone numbers that are painted over the surface of it. So those of us without war experience, we can look at these as works of art, those of us who have war experience can read those objects, tell us what they are, what they represent, how did this artist happen to have these. Again, objects as artworks that really helped us to have a conversation and gave the veterans a way to speak about what ideas, what feelings, what memories these objects prompted for them. So again, just the power of works of art to allow us to communicate, to talk about our experiences. I was really influenced, encouraged by that. And I'm going to bring up one more piece of art because, let's see if I can get this in here. So a couple of weeks ago, I was doing there was a lecture online from the Philadelphia Museum of Art. They have an exhibit that's up through, I think, January. And it's just one small room. It's just 6 paintings by the local Philadelphia artist, Horace Pippen. Horace Pippen. And so what they have on display is the 6 pieces of Pippen's work that they own. So he has a very large body of work. But when they started sharing his images, Horace Pippen, African-American artist from Westchester, prominent in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, even though he did not come through the academy, he did develop a national, if not international, following for his artwork. He was working in the same community as the Wyeths, as a matter of fact. So he's from that world. So you may have heard of him, and what perhaps the world knows of him or thinks of him, they think of him as a sort of naive artist. But when the curator at PMA put this up and said, well, he was a member of the Harlem Hellfighters during World War I, which was that segregated group of African Americans. The American army didn't know what to do with them, so they sort of gave them over to France. So they were fighting in World War I before America actually entered the war and developed this reputation for being fierce fighters under the French. And the French really decorated them, those who survived after the war. Horace Pippen was in that group. He came home with a war injury. His arm was injured, but he started, and in this book that I have about him, there are many images that he painted depicting his World War I experiences. And this is one of them. It's oil on cloth. So before he was even working with sort of the tools of the fine artist. So it's oil on cloth on this wooden frame. It's actually decorated with carved images of rifles and helmets and artillery. So very much has a 3D, he carved that out of wood. So the frame has this 3D recollection of artillery and armor that he was very familiar with. And then the image itself is of his war experiences. And I've read that he said that once he painted this, he felt that he could leave the war behind him. And there are other paintings that he did. I won't dwell on that, but there are other paintings that he did that talked about his war experiences, number one. Then the experience of coming home, and again, being an African-American veteran in a racist society and needing to cope with that. Maybe before the night is over, I'll share one final image. So everybody thinks of this artist as naive African-American, but he developed a powerful visual voice in articulating his war experiences. And when I fast forward to where we are today, 100 years later, we now have that genre of art that we call warrior art, veterans art. It's a movement, it's a thing. and perhaps we think of it as starting, really flourishing during the global war on terror, and perhaps starting during World War I, but we don't ever credit this particular artist with being a voice in that movement and being a leading voice in that movement, having spoken about his experiences during that period of time. So to wrap this up, it's the visuals that to me have been just so provocative, and have given me a way to understand, a way to hear the conversations that veterans who have had war experiences in a theater, and what those experiences, how those experiences have transformed them, you know, how they live with them, how they suffer with them. So the art tells me that they are continuing to suffer those experiences, that war is not a been there, done there, it's done kind of thing. It's an ongoing kind of thing that they are dealing with. And they're giving us ways to imagine what it is they are feeling, struggling with, and suffering. So it's been a profound experience for me, taking part in these 2 years of discussions and hearing what the veterans had to say and hearing their take on these images that other veterans have put out there for them, for us.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. I love what you said at the end, especially about helping us to imagine. There's a, you know, the Working with Veterans 101 training that Warrior Writers puts on, which I think you guys participated in. One of the tips on there is to not say something like, oh, I can't imagine what that would feel like. And some people think that that's confusing. And I always go back to this Drew Cameron, the founder of Combat Paper, who says, when you say you can't imagine, that's because you're not trying and you don't want to, and you're letting yourself off the hook. I mean, every day when we read a book, we imagine what it's like to be a character in the book, or when we watch these movies, we're imagining. And so I appreciate that, because, you know, I think that is what art is helping us to do, is to imagine a life outside of our own world, outside of our own. And I think especially as civilians who, you know, whether we like it or not, have paid taxes to support, you know, these wars, you know, we're part of the wars, whether it's very direct or not. And so I think it's important for us to try to imagine, to do that work. Thank you so much, Cassandra.
I'd like to say something. This is JC. Just to follow up on what you said, Cassandra, and Lavella right now, is that this is about imagination, because if you can imagine, then you can have empathy. You know, because you can feel some value of it or some aspect of it in yourself. You can feel your body responding to it. I felt that as one of the participants in Art of Reintegration, when we looked at the images and we looked at posters to enlist, you know, and inviting people to join the various military services and to during various wars. And as a civilian who is, for the most part, a pacifist, but with children who are in the military, I have found myself struggling for years for a place in their life that's been influenced by their military service. How could I understand that? And I want to say, we're being part of the Art of Reintegration, listening to the experiences of the military personnel who took part in that, but also Ramona, not a civilian from a military family, Cassandra, a civilian with a military father. I could feel that I had a place in that I could understand, that I could empathize and imagine particularly with one son, we've gotten very close. And I think that being in this community through the art of reintegration and attending a lot of warrior writer public events, that has just given me a way to participate with my children's feelings and experiences and the kind of lens that they bring to it, having served in combat zones. So I found it was a very powerful experience. And I thank you.
Thank you for that, JC.
Yes.
Ramona, did you want to, is there any images or things in particular that you wanted to share? No pressure. I just wanted to make sure that you were given that opportunity.
I did, but I can do it in the breakout room. So.
Okay. So, you know, we, you know, our times have moved around. I'll say that. I don't want to say we're late. I think we're all in good time. What I'm going to propose is that we, in the spirit of hoping that Kathleen and Ken can join, in case that they do, I would propose that we go to JC next and hear your poem and do some feedback or Q&A. And then if Ken and Kathleen join, we can go to them next. And then whatever time we have left, we'll do the breakout rooms. We may not have very much time, but I think hearing a poem next is, you know, a really great use of our time. So.
Especially with that lovely segue that JC just provided. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Unintentionally, but sure.
It works.
While I was part of Art of Reintegration, I was working on a book of poetry that concerns military experiences and civilian experiences in the Middle East during the since 1982. So conflict. And then goes back to my own childhood as a child of World War II. And I'm going to read some of the poems came through the Art of Reintegration. And those were poems about where I imagined the situations of veterans with PTS. And I'll read one of those. So this one is called Sweep. And it in part is comes from that sense of that act that drivers of convoys and military vehicles in combat zones and zones of conflict are continually sweeping the road, moving their eyes back side to side, looking for danger. And how many of them, one of my sons included, continue this into civilian life. My son separated in 2006. He still sweeps when he drives. When I'm with him, I see him doing it. And I thought it was a nervous habit, but no, I don't think it is. I think he is always in a state of alert of some sort. So this concerns a female veteran, and it's called Sweep. All dust and thunder, she says. The approach was a ground cloud dervishing above its length for a dash through a village. MRAPs and Humvees, gunners at the ready, and kids peppering the roadside, flattened against the walls of gardens and homes. Commotion draws them, she says, the din of a convoy, drivers stopping for nothing, even when the suck of sweep and speed and weight sweeps a stick-thin boy under the windshield, under the wheels. She's still scanning the roadside for trouble, she says, in her used SUV, driving to the daycare, the strip mall, the chemical air of the dry cleaner. After the first, she says, every time you go out, you know. So trying to think of my myself and my stumbling around to connect with my children in ways when they were responding to old war incidents or when they were experiencing moments of destabilization. That probably were a result of their time in the service. I wrote this poem. Now, this is not from the lives of my children nor my life. And I want to give a little trigger warning to it because it's because of the violence implied in it. It's called Particles. And the situation is a woman is listening to another woman who has finally broken down and told the incident that haunts her, or one of the incidents that haunts her. So this is from the point of view of the listener. Now there is a clot in the heat-dried air. Her voice retreats inward. She swallows commands there was no time to give, holds them down. Like tracers, they light what she saw. The air was a coarse ground of red meat. She tries to deny it, but the memory of their shoulders clings like sand on her tongue, and certain thoughts spin like stuck wheels. Suppose the air returns to being just air, and that long day of heat cools down. Now, knowing what she knows, how can I not see blood in the cloud stream of sunset? My daughter, no pills can erase, no remorse clear the air of particles you breathed in. They circulate in you. You entered the compound behind the fire team, and all but you are gone.
Wow.
And so as an artist, trying to imagine rather than pretend, invent, I found that my ability to see into situations, my imagination and my capacity for imagining and being empathetic was incredibly enlarged. And these poems are a result of it. I hope when the book's published, they'll help others too, you know, sort of passing it on.
Do all of your poems have a female voice, a female point of view?
This book is all women in war situations. So some of them are persona poems spoken in the voice of an invented character. Some of them are observational poems, but they all involve women citizens, civilians, and military in conflict situations that are related to war, either while they're serving or after they've separated. And I include points of view from women living in the Middle East too, living in combat zones. Because there's a kind of, you know, parallel of experience that we would never think of between the women soldiers who are their enemies and themselves who are seen as enemies. And yet circumstances so similar. So.
If I had a regret, I feel like we were introduced to the experiences of women veterans, but I'll blame time because of time, we weren't able to really go there in many of our discussions as I initially wanted to, and we've done it here and there, But, you know, the experiences of women are, from what I've read and from how I've talked to women veterans, they're just so profoundly different because they're women. And the things that they suffer and experience in as active duty people are just different, you know? Yeah. Which is not to say that only women suffer from sexual aggression. Men
Right,
do
right.
too, because we've read some of that poetry, but I think that there are a lot of voices from women that I want to hear more from. I want to hear more from. Yeah, want to hear what their struggles are.
Yeah, my daughter-in-law who served in Iraq, she's a physician, and she she served at it was a huge Air Force base, and so she did a lot of triage, but her specialty was the medevac flights, flying severely wounded to Ramstein in Germany so they could be treated at Landstuhl Medical Center. And she never talked very much about it, but the few things that she did say at different circumstances, she really bore a tough burden to keep people alive. And she did. She was apparently very good at it. Nonetheless, knowing that their lives would probably be compromised forever. And so her duty and her oath to heal, because she was a physician, still is. But I think also some of her female sensibilities and sensitivities. I don't want to gender type too much here, but somewhat, put her in a very difficult spiritual situation sometimes. So she was struggling. I do think that that happens with many people, not just in military, not just during combat. You always come up against this tussle. But stories she shared with me really got me thinking about the role of women in the military. I thank her for that. I really wish this program were continuing, not just for myself, although I'd be signing up, I'd be there. But I think it has, a great possibility or promise to bring together civilians who are, so many people don't know a thing about war in the US. And we don't have, well, we have a lot of diversity and we have a lot of division, but we don't have a lot of war. And I think it brought people together to share stories. And I began to see the overlaps of our lives. Of course, I was seeking to see that. So I thought the program was so wonderfully constructed because of the moving from art to stories, to sharing our experiences, to talking about contemporary events sometimes, to talking about public response to different conflicts that the US has been involved in. It felt very freewheeling, but I know it wasn't. It was really organized, but it was free. It was free and free. So I wish there were more opportunities to, and a way to bring it to more people.
I second that. I agree. Yeah, it feels like, you know, we've spent a couple of years getting something started.
Yeah.
And now it's time to go big with it, you know, like, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how that would work.
I feel like that's how it is with funding, you know, they're like, oh, go try this thing and we'll give you some money to do it for this amount of time. And you're like, oh, it's just getting good. We're just figuring it out. And then they're like, peace, you know, they're like, figuring it out. Especially now, you know, with everything, you know, online, I don't know, you know, what NEH or NEA are doing in terms of grants and this kind of stuff. I mean, it's not like we couldn't do it virtually, but we did not apply this year. I know there's been a lot of, challenges at HSP with staffing and, cutting programs. So
How is Warrior Writers working during this
I mean,
isolation?
it's been pretty easy for us to go virtual. But we have lost a lot of, money in terms of gigs that we would be hired, performances or workshops that would be hired to do. So, it's rough times for a lot of nonprofits out there, especially small ones like ours. So,
And especially the arts.
exactly. Yep. Well, I guess we have about 5 minutes left. So I don't think we'll do the breakout rooms just because, unless we want to do it for 2 minutes, which
Well,
if
time,
yeah.
and also I think we'd have some rooms of one person. So unless Dr. Sharp or Dr. Gunkel would like to give presentations to themselves.
So yeah, I mean, we have a few minutes left. Is there anything anybody else wants to say or ask or bring up?
I want to know what Ramona, what work moved Ramona.
Yeah.
She put some
Yeah.
interesting stuff on the table. Yes.
Yes, well, let me see if I can, just very quickly. I was going to talk about two things. One was photograph. I'll just hold it up. It's easier. Yeah, photographs. I don't know if you can see that. And I had some questions around that to start a conversation about homecoming from Vietnam. So that was one piece. But what I think I will share is a poem, and this poem really moved me. And the poem is a Vietnamese bidding farewell to the remains of an American. And do you want me to bring it up on the screen or just read it?
Just read it.
Okay. All right. A Vietnamese bidding farewell to the remains of an American. Was your plane on fire, or did you die of bullet wounds or fall down exhausted? Just so you died in the forest alone. Only the two of us, a woodcutter and his wife, dug this grave for you, burned joss sticks, prayed for you to rest in peace. How could we know there'd be such a meeting? You and I, once separated by an ocean, by the color of our skin, by language, but destiny bound our lives together. And today, by destiny's grace, you are finally going home. I believe your American sky is as blue as the sky above this country, where you've rested 20 years. Is it too late to love each other? Between us now, the ocean seems so small. How close are our two continents? I wish a tranquil heaven for your soul, gemmed with twinkling stars and shining moon. May you rest forever in the soil of your home.
Oh, no.
It just
So good.
moved me so much. And the thing is, and I was going to end with this after talking about everything with Vietnam and the difficult homecoming that so many of our vets experienced coming back from Vietnam. But despite that, when I read this poem, it was so much forgiveness. It was so much love. It was so much tranquility that came across from it, which is not what I think about when I think about homecoming from Vietnam. And the irony is that it was written from the perspective of a Vietnamese and his wife. And so at a time where I feel like our own country is so ripped apart, and while we're trying to find ways to remind ourselves that we're one country, here was someone who was in a country that we were once at war with, and they can find forgiveness. They can offer tranquility for someone who was seen, as their enemy. I was just like, it was so powerful for me when I first read it. in the program, but then to think of it in the times that we're in right now, it just moved me that much more. And that's what I was going to end with.
That's a really great way to end, Ramona.
I agree. Perfect.
I agree.
Yeah, Ramona,
Reconciliation. There it
Yes,
is.
it really speaks to that empathy.
Ramona, I asked if you could put the title of the poem and the author in the chat, because Katie's gonna gather all these beautiful things we're sharing and send them out to those of us here, but also to the participants who were in the discussion groups. Yeah,
Will do.
really great. That was a really great piece. Really great way to end it. And I know a bunch of, so Warrior Writers has partnered with the Joyner Institute, the William Joyner Institute in Boston area. And for many years, they have sent Vietnam veterans from the US over to Vietnam and connected with the poets there and brought them here. And some of the American veteran writers have learned Vietnamese and are translating their poetry. It's just such a beautiful thing that they're doing and connections that they're making. And if you haven't heard of the William Joyner Institute, check it out. So they have a lot of great, I think they've helped publish some of those books too. So that the connection that they've been building with Vietnamese veterans and American Vietnam veterans has been really beautiful. And maybe someday we'll follow in their footsteps. But thank you so much, everybody. Any, as they say in the military, saved rounds that anybody wants to, forgive me, Eddie, if that's offensive to you or you hate that term, but anybody want to share anything or say anything else before we say goodnight to each other?
Thank you for choosing me.
Thank you for being amazing. It was an easy choice. I'm sorry to, have it end, but I hope both of you will stay engaged in Warrior Writers. Actually, Glynis and I just made an announcement today that we're having an open mic on Veterans Day in the evening. So I hope you guys will check it out. I think you guys are on our mailing list. If not,
Is it online?
it's not. Yeah. Yep. It should be on our website. Maybe it's not yet. Did you send it to Lynn already, Glynis? Okay. Yeah. So it should be on the website and on Facebook.
I got it.
Great.
I'll be there.
Adapted, Ramona, it says adapted by Bill Earhart. Does that mean did he translate it or what is that?
So it was actually written by one person, translated by Fan So Chi, and then adapted by Bill. Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Bill said that
He went on time, so.
he couldn't remember. Someone handed him that poem when he was in Vietnam, and through the Joyner, a Joyner program.
Wow.
And it was so long ago, he didn't really remember, but he knew that when he got home, what the translator had said was to put this in, good English. That's a paraphrase. Bill did not say that, but something like that.
Right.
And then he was so moved by it that he really put himself into it too. So I think that's why it says adapted. He really isn't the translator. He's the second translator, but he also used it as a vehicle, I think, for from what he said, some of his own feelings.
Right. Yeah, and if you haven't read Bill Earhart, he's outside of Philly, Warrior Writer supporter and longtime mentor of mine. He's a really amazing writer. He doesn't just do poetry. He does a lot of essays. He's got, I don't know, probably 15, 20 books out there. He's a really amazing writer, Vietnam veteran. And I think he's got like 2 or 3, like a memoir series, as well as a bunch of poetry, as well as a bunch of essays. So he's a really amazing writer. All right, folks. Anything else?
Don't stop.
Well, take care, everybody. Hope you have a great night. Have a good weekend.
Yeah.
Stay safe, everybody.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
Bye.
so much for everything.
Hi,
Take care,
everyone. I'm so
everyone.
glad I heard your poems.
Live long and prosper.
Yeah.